Yeah, the bumper didn't work. I'm gonna cue Don.
Let me know.
Yeah, the logo, for some reason, my black hole. Go ahead, Don.
Good morning. I'm Don Seitz of the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council. PEC and the Department of Athletics have collaborated often on programming involving Princeton's alumni athletes. That's because athletics, innovation, and entrepreneurship are terms often used in the same sentence. Whether marketing a brand, be it a player, a franchise, or a league, growing audience engagement, leveraging cross-media and global opportunities, or applying data analytics for both athlete performance enhancement and audience interaction, athletics is indeed a very innovative and entrepreneurial pursuit. Today's format will include about 40 minutes of conversation, followed by 15 minutes of audience Q&A. To submit a question, please use the polls feature to the right part of the window on your screen, and you can both submit and upvote questions. With that, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Molly Marcoux Saman, class of '91 and Princeton's Ford Family Director of Athletics. Welcome, Molly.
Hey, thanks, Don. I'm really looking forward to this and really appreciate the partnership. I think we've done some, as you said, some amazing things together, and we're really looking forward today. Really want to welcome everyone to what I hope will be a really fun and engaging, thought-provoking conversation about the professional sports world response to COVID and the challenges that we're all facing today. Our panelists are pretty amazing. They're a really distinguished group of alumni who were superstar students and superstar athletes. In fact, as I was preparing for this, I was just thinking, wow, this is sort of the Hall of Fame of Princeton student athletes. So I think we're in for a real treat there. But they're now all engaged in the professional sports world in different capacities. But they've all approached these challenges with what we in the athletics department call a be a tiger mindset and value system. And their leadership through these difficult times has really been remarkable. I think through the work of them personally and their organizations, they've showed how the sports world continues to be a source of community building, can provide much needed joy and relief for lots of people, can serve as a distraction during difficult times, but also how sports can take a leadership role in the public nature of sports and really in society in so many different ways. So, the Women's National Basketball Association, the United States Golf Association, Major League Baseball, and the Premier Lacrosse League, all of whom are, are represented by our panelists today, all tackled these challenges of COVID and really the nation's call to action around some of the societal racial injustices. And we're going to focus on both the leadership and the innovation required to succeed in these challenging times. So really looking forward to it. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a brief bio of each of our panelists. Again, you can read all about them and the bios are amazing, but just to give you a little bit of sense of who we have with us today. First, we have Rachel Becker Dichecko, who was a three-time All-American at Princeton Women's Lacrosse, two-time national champion, two-time National Defender of the Year, and the Tewarden Award winner as the best female lacrosse player in the country, the only defender to win that award. Rachel began her work with the Premier Lacrosse League in March 2020, believe it or not, a great time to start a job. She was formerly the senior vice president of the Women's Premier Lacrosse League and the COO of the WPL Foundation. And she played a major key role in launching of the league. Next, we have Blake Dietrich, a class of 15, who was both a basketball and lacrosse student athlete at Princeton. Now just finished the season with the Atlanta Dream as a WNBA player. At Princeton, she was a three-time Ivy League champion, two-time first team All-Ivy, honorable mention All-America, unanimous Ivy League Player of the Year, and captain of the amazing 30-0 team that we all remember and cheered on in 2014-15. This year was her third full season in the WNBA. She's also spent time in Australia, Greece, and Italy playing. She played most recently in reserve role, but had a few starts at point guard, set the franchise record for three-point field goal percentage this season. Way to go, Blake. And just started a job with Nike in product development the day after leaving the bubble. So we'll have a great conversation there. Next, we have Stu Francis, the class of 74. At Princeton, Stu is a two-time Ivy League champion, All-Ivy, All-American on the golf team. He's the managing partner in his full-time role in life at Evercore, a global investment banking advisory firm. He helped lead the group of donors to endow our men's head coach position in 2013, which we're grateful for. And he's been a part of the USGA executive committee for the last 5 years, serving on the Compensation, Equipment Standards, and Governance Committee, in addition to 4 years as chair of the Championship Committee. So this year is Stu's first year as the USGA president, elected in February, also a great time, Stu, to take over, as part of a 3-year term. So we're going to hear a lot about the USGA today. And last, we have Will Venable, who you probably all know, class of 05, now the third base coach for the Chicago Cubs. But at Princeton, Will was a first-team All-Ivy in both baseball and basketball. He was selected by the San Diego Padres in the 7th round of the 2005 MLB draft. He went on to an 8-year MLB career with the Padres, Rangers, Phillies, and Dodgers. He was named the Padres team MVP in 2013, also not so bad, Will. Joined the Chicago Cubs in 2017 as a special assistant to the president of baseball operations. This season was his third as a Cubs coach, first base coach in 2018 and 2019, and a third base coach in 2020. So right in the middle of it all. So again, thank you, panelists. I'm really excited to have you. So let's just jump right into it. So, let's go back to March and the impact and the severity of COVID on professional sports. Obviously for us at Princeton Athletics, it was one of the most difficult times with canceling the spring season, canceling our postseason for our winter teams, and really just the heartbreak that came along with that. And I know that, the evening that the Ivy League was the first Division I school to cancel athletics, that evening the NBA shut down, and by that Friday, all of college athletics, and over the course of the next several days, most of all of professional sports was shutting down. So Stu, I'm going to turn right to you. As I said, you were named the USGA president in late February. What a time to step into that role. Can you first give a sense of your role as the president of the USGA, as some people may not be fully aware of the structure of the governing bodies?
Sure. Thank you, Molly. And it's a pleasure, I think, for all of us to be on this panel. So we're looking forward to the discussion. So the USGA, in a nutshell, is the governing body of golf. And it's the governing body in the US and the Americas. And then together with the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of Scotland, we collectively govern the game worldwide. And what that means is we set the playing rules, we set the equipment standards rules, we set the handicapping rules, and we set the amateur status rules. And then in addition, we conduct the US Open and 13 other major championships, US Open, the Women's Open. And then the final bucket, I'd say, is we really champion the game. We support the First Tee program. We support many programs that work towards greater participation in golf. And frankly, you certainly could claim that's working this year, because rounds of golf are up almost 45% since COVID was inflicted upon the US. I guess the last thing I'll say about the USGA, we're a nonprofit. We're about 225 million in revenues, and we generate that each year. The vast majority comes from broadcasting rights in the US Open, and then we reinvest it in the game.
Awesome. So stepping into this role, obviously you have a very successful and very busy career yourself, and then stepping into this role as the president right before COVID hit, how did you approach that crisis situation, and what did the first sort of month look like for you, or first 2 months on the job?
Well, the first thing we did was we almost had, I'd say, conference calls every 2 or 3 days, probably like every organization, to figure out what to do. The first parameter was clearly to keep the staff safe, healthy, and frankly employed, because we have a lot of uniquely skilled people that would be difficult to replace. But then the real question we had was, how can we conduct our championships? And if we have to prioritize, how do we prioritize? With clearly the US Open and the US Women's Open being the two major championships that we've really felt we had to conduct. And then we figured out from there, how could we do it? And the amount of interaction with both the other tours involved, the other organizations, because COVID hit three weeks before the Masters was supposed to be conducted. And there are four major championships in golf: the Masters, the US Open, the PGA, and the British Open. So we sort of had to determine what they were going to do. Then that had a ripple effect in what we were going to do timing wise and how the tour wanted to conduct things. So we really had to prioritize what could we do to conduct our championships.
And Stu, at the same time, you're managing a very complex business yourself. And so how were you personally able to kind of juggle all of that? Was the USGA role just all encompassing at that point? Or how did you manage both roles that you have?
It was pretty busy, I would say. I mean, it's, as everyone probably on this call knows, it's not easy to balance, you know, sort of charity work with your day-to-day career. The one good thing about the USGA is when you're working on either the US Open or things for the Women's Open, and then you can't make a business call, you can say, look, I have a conflict, I have a call on the US Open. It's not like you're going to play golf with your friends. They sort of get the priority level, and then they see you on TV and say, I get it, you know, I'll be flexible. But it took some real time management to handle it. Having said that, I think the senior leadership team at the USGA drove a lot of the key decisions, with me being there and the executive committee being there to sort of sign off on them.
And how were those, last question for you, Stu, how were those relationships with the other major tournaments, you know, and how did everyone jump in to try to really solve a problem that nobody had faced before, and thinking about moving the tournaments, and how did that process go?
Well, it was almost like a Rubik's Cube in figuring out what could work. We had to determine when could the tour safely relaunch its regular PGA Tour tournaments. Then when could the Masters move, and to what date? And they really couldn't move to the summer because the golf course is too hot in the summer. The US Open moved from June to September. And one of the most interesting questions on that is, how much daylight do you lose from going from June to September? And the answer is over 2 hours per day, which wouldn't have allowed us to have as many players in the US Open as normally, because they wouldn't be able to finish during the day for the first 2 days. So we had to determine which championships should move off the tour so that they'd make room for the US Open, and the same thing for the US Women's Open. The US Women's Open is coming up in December in Houston. And we were at least fortunate that we could get it in, and it was in a more southern climate. The US Open was at Winged Foot in New York, and the late September timeframe was about the last period that we could really be comfortable with. So we worked with all the other governing bodies, put down a chart which showed what are the possible dates, what are the hours we could do it, and then we finally came up with a conclusion. It was unfortunate because for the Royal and Ancient Golf Club, the British Open wasn't able to be played because they ran out of good weather. We had the September date, and they had to just postpone or cancel it for the year, which was pretty tough for them. So
yeah. Has that ever happened
conducted
before?
the US Open for 125 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, has the British Open ever been canceled?
It did, yeah.
But it hasn't.
No, never before, first time ever.
Yeah.
So they were pretty disappointed, but we ran out of dates that could work.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Stu. Rachel, turning to you, you know, as a new leader in a very new league that was really just creating itself, and is a very innovative league. And we've talked about this before, a very sort of marketing driven, a very high energy, you know, had, I'm sure, very clear plans for the second season. And how did you navigate having to sort of reimagine the league at this time when it was in really its infancy?
Yeah, that was actually onboarding in New York City when you know, an NBA made the announcement and then the Ivy League made the announcement, and we had our leadership just really, we sat down and thought about what are the possible scenarios, much like Stu talked about. Our season was about 75 days out when it happened, so we had to think about are we going to be able to have a regular season? Are we going to have fans and no fans? And I think we had 14 different scenarios going about what possibly we would do for the season. Coming off, you know, our rookie campaign as a new league, it was important to keep that momentum. So really, once we kind of realized that it was going to be a fanless sort of bubble situation, we just got to work on planning that, making sure everybody was as safe as possible, but also how we could, you know, get the growth that we need in that second year, get as many eyes on the games as possible, and really be creative with the broadcast and our social media to really kind of make the most, you know, obviously of a very difficult situation.
So talk a little bit about the leadership of the Premier Lacrosse League. I mean, it's very unusual in that the leadership actually plays. Many of the top executives actually play in the league, which is probably one of the only leagues where that occurs. And they're really in tune with the players and with the fans, and because they are players themselves. And maybe talk about how that dynamic played out.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, it's a huge plus. You know, Paul Rabel is one of the founders and one of the best men's lacrosse players of all time. He co-founded the league with his brother Mike, who's the CEO. So yeah, I mean, they certainly have a unique perspective because Paul is still playing and helped build this league along with some other players. So I think he sort of has that dual perspective of the business, but when he's thinking about as a player, is this what I would want? You know, when we were playing the bubble, thinking about time away from family and time away from their jobs, like how can we make this experience so, you know, not only not stressful, but something that they enjoy and feel good about and feel taken care of. And that was a lot of communication. So we had a leadership call every single night for 4 months leading up to the bubble, just to kind of talk through, you know, the logistics, but also how the players were feeling, any questions, concerns. You know, the situation was evolving so rapidly that we just had to stay in really close contact with them. And I have to say that was probably the best part of the bubble, just seeing the players really enjoy themselves and feel like they got to do what they loved after kind of having been home for months. So kind of watching them have that experience and really commit to the bubble and make sure they did everything they needed to keep us all safe was pretty incredible.
Now, did you guys, you were the, I think, second league to launch, right? The NWSL, the Women's Soccer League, had the Challenge Cup at the same location where you guys had any, how'd you come up with the bubble concept? Were you working with other leagues, with the NBA, with the WNBA, with, you know, the NHL, who did a phenomenal bubble? You know, how did that all evolve? And you guys went to market really pretty swiftly.
Yeah, so I mean, Paul and Mike were in contact with the leaders of others, some of the big four and some of the other leagues, just to kind of hear about what people were working on, different scenarios. Obviously, every sport is different. Being an outside sport certainly helps us. Yeah, and then I think so. The NWSL was finishing when we got there. So we were able to kind of see learnings from what they had started. You know, obviously they had some issues leading up to it, which was a great opportunity for us to point to our players, just to say how easily you can jeopardize the season. But excuse me, but having been at the same venue, obviously there's an additional layer, 2-3 layers of logistics with COVID. Just simple things like deliveries, like food. You can't just have delivery people like entering the bubble. So little things like that, we kind of learned from the venue and NWSL, things that they had just experienced it. So we were able to tweak some things, you know, and really kind of grateful that the venue was so great to work with, and NWSL obviously kind of came the week before us. So we were able to kind of watch that from afar.
Yeah, I remember it was just so exciting to be able to see sports again, and to you know, I have a little 11-year-old lacrosse player who just was obsessed by what you guys were doing, and it was great that he could actually see.
Yeah, the player said it was adult summer camp. I mean, not since college do you get to spend an extended amount of time, you know, with your friends playing a sport you love. So getting to watch them experience that, I mean, it was, and I think the appreciation was different because we had all just been home and you hadn't seen people really outside of family for the most part. So recognizing how easily we could have just said, you know, we're not going to do a season, let's just wait. So the appreciation for the effort and the work that went into actually getting the season off, I think really made the guys appreciate it that much more.
Yeah, absolutely. So Blake, let's turn to you in terms of being in the bubble. You were actually in the wubble. You were a player and having to manage so many different things. How did you and the players respond to the league's approach to the wubble? When you heard that's how things were going to flesh out, how did you respond to that, and what was your mindset?
Yeah, I think, well, like Rachel said, it really did feel a little bit like summer camp. We had bikes going around IMG Academy. We'd bike to practice, bike to meals. It felt like college all over again. But before we got there was so much discussion, and we had to come to an agreement. Similar to MLB, there was a lot of back and forth with the Players Association and the league about the regulations, what was going to happen, all that kind of stuff. And getting to that agreement was very challenging because people were concerned about being away from family for so long, what the bubble was going to look like, what amenities would be there, all of those very small things that affect your quality of life so much. And we're so used to the way our season goes, and when you're not playing, you have an escape. You can go back to your family, go back to your home. And without that, I think people were a little bit worried about how it was all going to look. But I think the league did an incredible job of making us feel safe primarily, and then having an enjoyable experience as well.
Yeah, and I've heard such wonderful things about the leadership at the WNBA, and how did they communicate to coaches, to players? Sort of what was the mechanism of communication? Were the administrators talking directly to the players? It was through the Players Association? How exactly was that playing out?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything. I think our executive committee on the Players Association, who is like Stu Bird, Natalie Achonwa, Elizabeth Williams, Lasia Clarendon, they were kind of the go-between a bit. But Kathy Engelbert, our president, would have direct discussion with the whole league whenever possible. And there were text messages, like league-wide text messages, league-wide group chats, like all that kind of stuff, so that everyone was staying as involved and up to date on current information as possible. There was, you get a little bit of like heard it through the grapevine things, and rumors and all that kind of stuff definitely happens. But I think the league was pretty upfront and open, and the players were engaged as well. It wasn't just receiving the information. We were very engaged in what was going on.
Yeah, it seemed like again, Kathy seems like a phenomenal leader, and has really gained the respect of players and managers and fans. And how do you think she's done that, just from a player's perspective? The leadership styles really seem to be very effective.
Yeah, I'll give a quick example. I think when we were the first game after what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and we needed to decide what to do. I think the Milwaukee Bucks had just decided that they were not going to play in their game. So we are arriving at the arena, and we were playing, who were we playing that night? DC, I'm sorry. We were playing DC. And they asked us, what do you guys want to do? Would you like to play? Do you not want to play? And we were like, we don't really know. The point of this season for us was to be the voice for the voiceless. And so that was why we had chosen to play in the first place. But DC didn't want to play in that game. And so we're all kind of standing on the court. The clock is ticking down. You have 90 minutes from till the tip off. And so the clock's ticking down. We're at 80 minutes. And Kathy walks out onto the court. And it's obviously a huge financial loss for the league for us not to play. That was, I believe our game was an ESPN game. There was an NBA TV game, the next game of the night. And she came out on the court and was like, look, this is your league. This is your decision. Whatever you want to do, the league supports you. We're here for you. We want to talk this through all together. We want you to understand that we support you no matter what. So that was really incredible. It was like a town hall kind of discussion, and we all had a say, we all had a voice, and she wasn't insisting on anything, even though she knew the league was going to take a loss. Because she understood that the whole season was about being bigger than sport and greater than basketball. And yeah, so that meant a lot to me. I think it meant a lot to most of the other players.
Sounds like a phenomenal sort of servant leader, and the ability to sort of manage many constituents and really bring voice to all members of the community. That's awesome. Great. Yeah. So Will, obviously the Major League Baseball did not operate in a bubble either. What plans and controls did your team, did the Cubs put in place against these sort of additional variables outside of, being in a really enclosed bubble that you can lock down in a very different way than allowing your players to come in and out of practice and competition and travel?
Yeah, I think leadership did a great job of really kind of creating our own bubble, and kind of really driven by, just setting some expectations for behavior away from the field and at the field, everything that a baseball player goes through during the grind, so much of it is supported by things away from the field, whether that's, you know, your family or going out to eat, just getting away and going to get a nice meal. And Chicago's got amazing food. Or on the road, you know, going out and with the guys and having a nice meal on the road. Like just really important things, especially with guys that are in the prime of their lives, really enjoy doing as baseball players. And so we had to kind of set an expectation that those things just weren't going to be possible if we wanted to be really committed to the protocol and really stay safe and healthy. So we had to really be clear on the expectations and have guys, you know, trust each other and create buy-in to make that happen and create kind of our own bubble of safety where we could feel safe and healthy. And then we had to follow it up with all the things that you need to support those things. If we're not going to have, if you're not going to be able to go get food, we need to be able to bring it all on site. You know, we needed to make sure travel was safe and make sure things were convenient. Food, all the food was at the hotel. We had rooftop availability at the hotel where we were on our own without any other people. So the team did a great job of kind of supporting these guys with the things that they needed, even though really the main point was to, you know, creating an expectation for behavior away from the field and at the field to kind of create our own bubble of safety.
And were there any specific challenges with that? Did the players really buy into it? And how did they approach and Blake, maybe we'll come back to you on this too. How did they approach their own performance? I mean, we work in Princeton Athletics all the time about sort of holistic performance for our student athletes and giving them the right environment to reach their peak potential. How did the club approach that, and really Major League Baseball as a whole, knowing that there are all these distractions and their bodies and their minds are so important to their success because they have to go on the field on a national stage and perform? And was there a specific way that the club approached that?
I think a lot of ways. I mean, I talked about families and how important they are, like, but every single portion of what these guys go through, and Blake could describe it better than I can from a player's perspective, but everything from the information that they get, the way that they prepare, their environment away from the field, their environment at the field, their ability to connect with each other on and off the field, like it was all disrupted. And so we had to be really efficient, you know, in how to support them. And I think that's kind of what the silver lining in all this will be, is that the most efficient ways to do that in these problems that, you know, maybe weren't given enough, you know, attention in the past are able to kind of come to the forefront, you know, mental health stuff, all kinds of stuff that we just really had to lock into because these guys weren't supported in the ways that they had previously been supported.
Yeah, maybe Blake, back to you on that as an athlete and wanting to succeed on the court with all of these distractions. Were there positives to being inside the bubble for your own performance? Obviously, all of the environment was created for you, and I would imagine that it was in some ways helpful to have you reach your peak performance.
Yeah, it was a grind. I have joked that I turned 30 this summer. My body turned 30 this summer and I'm 27, so that'd be a big jump in 1 year. But it was, playing every other day is unlike anything I've ever done before since like AAU, when you're 13 years old and you play 4 games a day and it's no big deal and you get up and you're ready to go again. That's not the case anymore. I will say the league did a really good job of making mental health a priority, because we're pretty good at taking care of our bodies. We know what we need. But in that situation, the mental health, I think, was something that could have been forgotten. And we had access to sports psychologists. We had access to yoga sessions, meditation sessions. There was a lot of support with that. I think in discussion about what the bubble might look like if there is a bubble next summer, there was a push to even increase the mental health assistance and awareness and all of that kind of stuff, because being away from your family is a huge difficulty. And so I think that was something that we really wanted to focus on. But I think overall the league did a pretty good job. And the IMG facilities are incredible. So we had pretty good access to cold tubs, all of that kind of recovery type stuff.
I saw a salon. I think you could go get your hair cut at any moment, and massages and
yes.
environment. Cool. So Stu, how did you guys focus? I mean, golf, obviously, by the nature of it, it can be socially distanced. So you were able to get into action relatively quickly. But what experts were you leaning on, and how did you approach the health and safety of not only the athletes, but all of the supporting team around the team, as we call it? Sorry, Stu, you're muted.
We had the benefit of the fact that the PGA Tour was going to start up before the US Open and the Women's Open were going to be conducted. So we did have a level of test cases, if you will. And we really did try to follow to a reasonable extent the protocol implemented by the tours, because the players had gotten comfortable with that. As Blake said, as Will said, everybody was comfortable with how the leagues were conducting things. It's a little different in golf in that, A, you don't earn a salary. Whatever you make by your performance that week. And B, you're not on a team, you're an individual. So you can make any decision you want. And if you don't want to go play that week because you're not comfortable, you just don't do it. So we had to sort of replicate how the tours did it, which we did. We used the same testing procedures, et cetera. But the little logistics were interesting. Like we created our bubble for the week at the US Men's Open in Scarsdale. And we had one hotel that was lined up. It was going to be only for the US Open. And then 3 weeks before the US Open, they went bankrupt. And then we got another hotel lined up, and they were good for a week, and then they went bankrupt. So we literally had to do 3 hotels. The third hotel was just a Marriott, which did okay, but that was our bubble for the week. And they had a Ruth's Chris steakhouse there. So everybody went there every night for dinner. But we captured everyone in that bubble. They were permitted to go other places because you have to, the hotel itself was about 30 minutes away from the golf course. But it's a little different than a team in that each person can make their own choice as to what they want to do. But it did ultimately work out. We did testing every day, temperature testing every day, things like that. But it had to be done in a manner similar to how the players were used to it. You didn't want to be an outlier. The last thing I'll say, professional golf is different than many other sports in that the 4 major championships for the men and the 5 major championships for the women are all conducted by organizations that aren't the tours.
Right.
And so it's a little awkward for them. If you were the athletic director of Princeton and every league championship was conducted without your input, it wouldn't be that comfortable for you. Well, the tour is never that comfortable with it. They know us well, but we really had to interact. And what we tried to do is follow all of their protocols.
So talk a little bit about that leadership. I mean, again, from you and from the CEO and from the tour leadership, were there any moments that were very difficult and you had to employ your best skills that you learned as an athlete and as running Evercore? Were there really some tough moments where people were disagreeing on protocols, or were the athletes, worried about specific things that you guys were trying to manage?
I think the most important thing for us to get through this as a sport was really for everyone to talk regularly, put what they'd prefer to do on the table, and then compromise. I mean, we had to compromise in that we went from that. One of the hallmarks of the 2 opens, the men's and women's, is that you can qualify for the open. 75 people are exempt due to their play for the year, and the other 75 come in through 50 to 100 qualifiers around the country. And we think that's one of the fundamental benchmarks of the opens. But we had to cancel all qualifying and create an exempt US Open and US for both men and women this year. And we had to broaden the exemption. So you go from 75 to 150. And that every tour had a point of it, like the PGA Tour had a point of view as to how many people they wanted to get in. The LPGA Tour for the women had a point of view. Then you have the Symetra Tour, you have the European Tour, you have the Asian Tour. Everyone said, oh, great, the number of exemptions are doubled. So that means we're going to get X, Y, and Z more. And I guess the last thing I'd say is what we tried to do was replicate a regular US Open, which typically includes 15 to 20 amateur players. and yet they couldn't have qualified in based on the fact that there were no qualifiers. So we created exemption categories that were broader in the amateur ranks, and that took some real selling for for us to go to either Jay Monahan of the PGA Tour or the women's tour and say the quarterfinalist in the U.S. Amateur should get into the U.S. Open, and they're like, well, what do you mean? I mean, that person couldn't even play on the tour. And we said, yeah, but we're going to replicate the championship we wanted to conduct. So it took a lot of communication, a lot of cooperation. It took some real backbone on some things. We didn't back down on a number of things that were important to us, but everything couldn't be important to us. So that's how we looked at it.
Were there any, I always think you have to define your values in any organization, and then your behaviors sort of follow those values. In time of crisis, probably even more important to go back to those values. Was that a specific thing that you spoke about? Hey, this is what the USGA cares most about. This is what the tour cares most about. And let's funnel everything towards those priorities and those values. Were there really outward conversations about that, or was that just implied throughout the process?
Well, I think we had really thought through what championships on both the women's and the men's side are the most important to us. And, we have 14 of them, and we only are conducting 4 this year. So that pretty much tells you we're doing the men's and women's open and the men's and women's US Amateur, and that's it. So the other 10 championships, we said, look, as important as they are, and the US junior boys or US junior girls have been played for 90 years, we have to cancel it for this year. And that was very tough to do. The staff, you have a person, just like we have a head coach for whatever sport, the person who's the leader for that championship says, do you mean to tell me, I'm going to be canceled this year? But we really had prioritized sort of what are the most important activities we need to do, and how can we do them superbly? And the last thing I'd say in that is, we recognize that the women's open and the men's open are by far the high visibility events for the USGA and for the tours. And if we didn't get those right, it was a huge reputational blow to us. And so we said, we have to do everything possible to do those well. And if that means cutting other championships, so be it. And that's what we did. And I was very proud of the staff for having the ability to make that decision. You wouldn't say it's like, we have 37, 38 sports, 35 sports at Princeton. If you said, well, this year we can only play 3, right, that wouldn't be easy.
No, that wouldn't be easy at all, nor would we
I could, hopefully that will never happen, but it was a very hard set of decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rachel, going to you, and how did sort of technology play into the PLL, and were there any sort of pivots that you had to make to utilize different technology at the moment that the league was sort of kicking off?
Yeah, I mean, technology played a huge part in keeping us safe. So, there needed to be some healthcare information collected daily. So temperatures, symptoms. So we worked with a company called OutSystems who actually built out 2 apps for us. One was a temperature app, and one was health symptoms. So leading up to departure 2 weeks before, people started to enter in their daily. We're all doing it now every day with different, wherever we're going. It's part of our life, but then it wasn't. So you basically had to answer questions about how they were feeling, and then anything that was flagged for the physician required follow-up. So being able to aggregate and capture that data real time was huge, because obviously, we had a bubble environment and we had pods by team. And one of the key components of our plan was that until training camp was over, we didn't want pods to cross, because once you cross pods, if somebody is infected, it would take out, not 1 team, but 2, 3, 4 teams. So having that data live, if there was an issue or somebody's temperature was high, we could address it immediately, isolate that person if need be. And luckily it didn't happen. Everybody was healthy throughout, but being able to have access to that information on our phone and share with the physicians was huge for us.
Awesome, cool. So let's zoom back out a little bit to the role of sort of professional sports during this really crazy time in our world. Will, obviously all eyes were on Major League Baseball. We had a couple teams who, right at the beginning had some problems, and it looked like the league was going to start and stop really quickly. And I would say just globally, sports are right in the middle of everyone's mindset and on TV every day, and making decisions really affect not only the league, but it affect other organizations that are approaching this challenge. How did you guys look at that situation when I think it was the Marlins, right, who had an outbreak and they had to cancel some games right away? And was there a lot of stress within the clubhouse? And were there conversations between leadership and coaches and players, or what was the tenor at that point?
Well, when you see other teams have issues and stuff, it's pretty sobering for everybody in the building to kind of recommit to the protocols and how we're behaving and stuff. And so I think it was, as much as you hate to see that stuff, I think it was probably part of the reason that some teams were able to get to the finish line, because there were those examples of what happens when you maybe don't behave in the way that you're supposed to. So I think kind of as a league that was trying to, like you said, be an example for not just the rest of the sports, but for the country, like, taking real responsibility for your actions and how they're perceived. And I know that there's a lot of talk about, our behavior on the field, maybe not wearing some masks in some close quarters in the dugout and stuff. And those things are tough, and guys took that personally. They wanted to do things right, not just because they wanted to survive the season, but they wanted to be an example for the rest of the country.
Yeah, really important. And I think it has, by showing sports and showing what works and what doesn't work through this endeavor, I think it's helped other people in their lives say, like, listen, if you don't follow these rules, you see what happens. No one's exempt from this. And so it just seemed like sports was leading the way, even with, as you said, with some stumbles, but then being able to be accountable and then sort of rethink the protocols. And did you guys have any real challenges within the Cubs, or everyone pretty much stayed in line?
Everyone was really good. I mean, I think we were maybe the only team that didn't have a positive in our organization through the whole, and not in our organization because we did, but at the big league level. So guys were really good. I think, every once in a while there was kind of interpersonal checking of each other that maybe wasn't always comfortable, guys holding each other accountable and stuff. But otherwise it was pretty smooth considering, everything that was going on.
Yeah, awesome. And Blake, did you guys talk about that at all? That obviously we can get into some of the real stands that you took on really important issues in society, but sort of starting with, did you guys sit around and say, listen, we need to do this right, and we need to be leaders in what society is going through? And how did the league approach sort of the public nature of the situation?
Yeah, I think we wanted to be an example. And if you saw the upper level people, if you saw our executive committee always wearing their mask, always on time to testing, all that kind of stuff, it trickles down. So even though there were players who entered the bubble and maybe were not super excited about the idea of it, you just you bring those people along as long as everyone else is bought in. And then in terms of the social justice aspect, we had such a unique opportunity having every team in the same place. I think it made that part of the season so much more powerful and so much stronger, because if we were in all our different cities, it wouldn't be the same, and we wouldn't be able to create that unified message as easily. So I think in that aspect, when our season became about so much more than basketball, having it in a bubble was an incredible opportunity, and I think we took pretty good advantage of it.
Awesome. So, and Stu, just with your dual role in life and the public nature of the decisions that the USGA was making, as well as obviously the PGA and the LPGA and the major tournaments, did that enter your mind? Sort of, oh wow, I'm in the middle. I'm going to be handing out that trophy. If this doesn't go well, this is very different because people are watching. As you said, rounds of golf are up. The way that the professional golf has sort of provided some happiness and joy to people on Sundays. The championships. How did you approach that just from your own mindset?
Well, there's no question that its visibility has its positives and its negatives. And I personally was well aware that if the US Open didn't go well, it was going to be a challenge for myself and my day job. Related to that, one of the interesting things was, the staff would come to the executive committee, which is like the board, and we'd make these decisions, but we probably had an executive committee call every 3 or 4 days, and just I knew exactly what was going on. So it was easy for me to make the leap to say, let's cancel 10 championships. For the executive committee to sort of have to rapid fire make those decisions when they have full-time day jobs, like one woman, Debbie Majoris, is general counsel of Procter & Gamble. One fellow is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Richmond. And I was asking them to meet on 3 hours notice for 3 hours to make fundamental decisions when I had the background that they didn't have. And I was very worried about losing support of the executive committee because they didn't sign up for a full-time, not-for-profit board role in addition to their day jobs. But we were able to get through that. But I think every person on the committee, including myself, did worry about, if we don't conduct the US Open and the Women's Open well, how does that reflect on us? And, but it's like anything in sports, you have to execute. Right. You prepare yourself for the moment, and in the moment you have to deliver. And that's how we looked at it. And we have delivered. And I think we will down in Houston for the Women's Open. But it's balancing the public role of a visible sport and your regular role in whatever work you have is tricky because it does spill over.
Yeah. And I think so many people, as I said, so many people were looking to the sports leagues to figure out COVID. There were no answers to any of this. No one knew exactly how to manage this. We were in a situation where no one's ever been through it before. And so really looking towards all of your leagues to say, how can we live in our own lives, and how will this work? And so really grateful for everyone's work. I know we have some questions in the chat. And so Don, I don't have access to those questions. I don't know. Do you want to ask those?
Absolutely. One question specifically for Will comes from a guest whose favorite ballpark is Wrigley Field. So the question for Will and certainly for others is, how has the absence of people in the park, other than maybe the outsiders along the perimeter of Wrigley Field, affected play, the intensity of play, the strategy of play? And do you think any rule changes that surfaced in the 20 continue into 21?
Great question. Will.
Yeah, great question. As far as strategy wise, without the fans, I don't think that it changed much, other than like Blake was saying, you could hear everything. So it definitely changed the dynamic of just the acoustics of the ballpark. And obviously energy wise too. I think especially in Chicago, Wrigley Field is as energetic a building as there is in probably as all of sports. And some of these guys really thrive on that. They really enjoy being entertainers and playing in front of an amazing, energetic crowd. So I think that was another challenge where the environment was different, where guys had to figure out new ways to get motivated, especially in baseball when you're playing every day. Sometimes you need a little boost from the fans, and guys didn't have that. So that was definitely a big difference. I think the rule change, I really liked the extra inning rule, where you started a runner at second base to really get through the extra innings more quickly. Really, really tough on some guys in the bullpen where they get taxed, and you have to make some roster moves and get guys out and send them down when they usually, to no fault of their own, when it's just kind of a roster crunch and they're victims of that. So I think kind of for the integrity of the game, that's a really good one. And then I don't know what they're doing with the DH, but I like the DH too. So there'll be a couple rules that stay, but I thought they did a good job of making some adjustments.
Great. Don, were there others? Because I have about 1,500 more that I could go. This is so fascinating.
We probably have a time for 2 or 3 more questions if we sort of do a rapid fire. So this question might be best for Stu, which is, tell us about the financial impacts to the sport, particularly, with that no on-site attendance?
Well, it's a good question. It's pretty substantial. Obviously, we get 225,000 fans for the week at the US Open. They all pay full price, and then typically they'll buy 2 to 3 times the amount of the ticket price in merchandise. And we had ordered all of the merchandise. So if anyone wants a US Open at Winged Foot shirt, I can give you a deal. But so it was pretty substantial. I mean, the US Open comprises, well over 50%, the men's open over 50% of our revenues. And we're able to do it, but with no fans. The one thing that we did very thoughtfully, and this I will give good credit to the executive committee for doing, but we about 3 or 4 years ago asked the question of the leadership team, do we have event cancellation insurance? And the answer was no, we've got our endowment fund, and hopefully we'll be able to conduct a championship at all times. And we said, well, let's go price it out and see what it costs. And event cancellation insurance at that point in time wasn't that expensive. So we have a very meaningful claim in front of the insurance company now. It won't pay us back for everything that we've lost from the year, but we're financially solid. So it's like we hit it in the rough, chip out, and move on.
Right.
But it had a huge impact, is what I'd say. Now, the one thing from a positive standpoint is we did make the decision to first of all stop the build out that we were doing at Winged Foot Golf Club in June for the men's open. And in early June, we stopped the build out for the women's open in Houston. So that's a pretty big expense. It's not the equivalent of building a Wrigley Field twice every year, but it's still a substantial amount of work that takes 6 months to do. And so we didn't do any of that. So we had a reasonable amount of savings from that standpoint, but we still paid out the full purse, $12.5 million for the men, and we'll pay out the full purse for the women as well. So it was a financial significant event, but we're going to get through it. And I'm very happy we did think about the idea of event cancellation insurance. It was a very smart thing to do.
Good idea. Absolutely. Don, do we have time for one more? I mean, again, we could talk so much about how sports are going to change and the innovation that was developed during this time. I don't know if there's a specific question around that.
There's a question actually to Blake and Rachel in particular. Did the bubble improve the collegiality among the players and across competitive teams?
Maybe go to Rachel on that one.
I think in some instances it did, and in some instances it was tougher because you figure after the games, every team had a bus, but we were all in one hotel. So normally you play a team and then you go your separate ways, but there was a lot more interaction, like, coming into the lobby post game and then breakfast in the morning. Everybody had their own slots, but there was a lot more opportunity for interaction than normal. So the guys were all really great, but it was certainly, as we got into playoffs, the sort of air got much thicker in the hotel. You could tell the intensity was rising, and but I think they also bonded in a way that they were experiencing something that really nobody had. So it had its moments, but I think overall it was more of a bonding experience than anything else.
And one final question, Molly, if we can squeeze it in, because it's a great question, is how have you remained relevant to your fan base during these really challenging times?
Well, maybe we'll go to Blake on that one.
Social media. I mean, I think it's the way of the future in terms of sports marketing, and that's what we've tried to do. And I think individual players, social media as well as the league in general. But I think, that's how we have to reach young fans, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, so great. I think, Don, we're probably at the end. I just want to again express my sincere gratitude for all of you. The last time we talked, we could have talked for 3 hours. I feel like I have about 15 more questions to ask you guys because there's so much innovation, so much marketing, so much impact on society on the work that you all did. So we're grateful for that and really excited to have such an amazing panel with us today. Don, anything else we need to do to wrap it up?
No, other than I add my thanks to this discussion to all 5 of you. Stay safe, stay healthy, And to all attendees, thanks for joining, and we'll see you at other sessions.
And go
Bye-bye.
Tigers.
Go Tigers.
Go
Thank
Tigers.
you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Are we still?
Bye, guys.